Thanks, Ron. So I am Thaddeus Worsnop. I'm a solutions architect with AWS out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is low code, no code machine learning. Because AWS has a full stack of machine learning services, I like to start by kind of demonstrating where our low code, no code services fit within the stack. So we'll be focusing on these two small cubes here on the bottom left of SageMaker Canvas for our no code and SageMaker Studio around the low code services. But as you can see, there's a whole portfolio of services around this. And before we jump into the low code, no code, I think it's important to understand that in the same vein of low code, no code, there are all of our AWS AI services. So the AI services are ready to use, production ready services that can allow you to integrate machine learning and AI into your own environment without actually training the models. So here's kind of an overview of some of the things that you can put together. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but there are some services like Amazon fraud detector, which obviously is a point solution that lets you do fraud. Other things like the intelligent document processing that we'll be talking about later is going to put together a number of our services depending on what you want. So that could be TextTrack to extract values from PDFs, and then maybe translation, and then Comprehend for doing natural language processing. But the point is there are a number of these services that you can put together just using our pre-built AI services and not actually building your own model. So it's always a good idea before you jump into any sort of machine learning project to understand what's already out there. Certainly wouldn't make sense for you to build your own fraud detection if you haven't at least evaluated the services that are available for you to start. So a little bit of a teaser, but now we'll jump into the low code, no code machine learning, since that's our topics. So why do we need these services to provide low code, no code? Really, the biggest answer to that is that there's not enough ML builders. There's not enough data scientists to go around with all the different projects that are going on. So we need to both streamline their work so that they can focus on the really high value pieces, but also to offload to other resources. So when we talk about SageMaker Canvas, that's going to be targeted more towards a business persona, not necessarily technical. Could be business analysts, could be program managers, people in lines of business. And as we step into the low code, it's data analysts, it could be infrastructure people, it's someone that's technical, but they don't have to be data science experts in order to leverage the tools. And this will all make sense, obviously, as we step through the services. Now, one of the big parts that takes up a lot of data science times, in some cases, it's estimated to be as much as 80% of their time is data preparation. So we'll look a lot at our SageMaker Data Wrangler offering, which helps with the data preparation. We'll also look at some AutoML pieces that kind of takes in the data, does all your feature engineering type preparation for you without even having to understand it. And at the end of the day, we're going to talk about how all these things plug in together, because it doesn't do any good if a business analyst goes out, proves that this problem can be solved with machine learning if you can't then productionize it. So we'll look at how all these pieces fit together and provide clear paths from no code into productionized data science projects. So the two different offerings, as I mentioned, was SageMaker Canvas and SageMaker Studio. SageMaker Canvas being completely no code, so all point and click. You don't have to know about the AWS console. It's a standalone application that you can launch versus SageMaker Studio, which will exist within the AWS console and allow you to have access to a few more of the knobs. So when I say knobs, to make a no-code service, you have to make opinionated decisions about how something should be done. If you have data science expertise or you have really deep domain knowledge, you don't always want those opinionated solutions. So maybe you go more towards the low code. But either way, we'll talk about both today. But I'm going to start with the simplest flavor, which is SageMaker Canvas. So with SageMaker Canvas, it's going to give you easy access to solve problems on tabular data, text-based data, image data, and you're going to be able to easily bring in your data, train a model, make predictions, and if appropriate, maybe hand it off to a data science team in a format that they're comfortable working with. So let's look at how all that happens. As I mentioned, this is a standalone application, so there's no need to log into the AWS console. You can get to it through the console if you have access and you're comfortable with that, but your ID teams could also put SageMaker Canvas into your single sign-on portal to launch. Here you can see an example of opening SageMaker Canvas from an Okta single sign-on portal. Regardless of how you get into the SageMaker Canvas, once you're in, it's time to start connecting to some data so that you can solve some of these business problems. Now, it could come from a data lake or a data warehouse, but a lot of times with no code, people are just uploading CSVs that maybe they exported from their business tools or that they have on their local systems. You can click simply upload from your local machine. Here you can see an example of joining two different CSVs to train on, but if all your data is in one CSV, you could certainly just upload that one CSV into AWS. And as soon as you've uploaded it into the Canvas portal, you'll start to get visualizations. So the visualizations are a big part of machine learning. And a lot of times data scientists will use those to look for outliers, see how the data is distributed. But even if you don't understand any of these visualizations, you're going to get data quality metrics that are going to tell you when there's problems. So here you can see on the right-hand side of the screenshot that there's some data quality issues, and it specifically tells you there's missing values. Now, doesn't mean you can't train your model, but it does inform you about your data. And if you want to iterate on the source data that you're bringing in and maybe make sure that some of those missing values are filled in ahead of time or something like that, you could certainly import those and train. But assuming that this is the data that you have and you're ready to train, it's really easy, literally a single click to train a model. So all you have to do is tell it which column you want to predict. So in a situation where you're trying to predict price, you would select the price and you would go ahead and quick build. Obviously, it's going to vary based on what sorts of models you're training, but it's going to be a similar point and click intuitive experience to build that model. Now, it's going to only take a few minutes for it to generate the first model. And it's going to give you really easy to understand metrics of that model. So here we can see that it's 88.6% accurate at predicting the correct target, but it gives you some additional data because it's not always the same to predict yes when it's yes. Think about a case where you have fraud. Well, fraud's going to be a very small percentage, so it's more important to have high accuracy on those fraud cases. So it tells you how good the model really is based on the data, what you're trying to predict, by giving you this little breakdown of when it's right on yes versus no. Maybe the model's good enough for what you were doing, but if not, you can obviously try to get more data or just understand there may not be enough signal in the data that you're using. Now, from this point, if the model is appropriate for your use case, you could hand it off to a data science team. As I said before, it's really easy to export these models, and it's going to become an artifact within the SageMaker Studio that the data scientists are comfortable using and kind of iterating on what you had. So perhaps you have an idea that you want to bring forward to your team. So you just need to kind of validate that there's enough signal in the data to make accurate predictions. And once you have that handed off, it becomes a full project. In other cases, you don't have a data science team to hand off, and you just need to make predictions based on that model. You can also do that from this same console. So here we see they were working on a customer churn model, and they can do some simple what if analysis. So in this case, what if we change the contract duration from 2 years to month, and get accurate predictions out based on the model that was created. You can also see here in the column impact which features or which variables are going to have the biggest impact on whether or not a customer churns. So you can kind of see that here, online security, contract duration, these things have high correlation, whereas paperless billing has very low correlation. So it goes ahead and provides, again, opinionated styles, but it's opinionated in filtering to show you the most impactful metric at the top. You can certainly see the full metrics there. And beyond doing what if analysis, you can also do either batch or one-time predictions on this. And you've got a machine learning model making predictions based on your data that you trained. Now,
hey, Thaddeus?
Yes, sir.
This is very powerful. What if someone is not an AWS customer? How can they take advantage of this specific tool if they don't currently have huge S3 and other AWS instances running?
Yeah, so you can sign up for an AWS account. There's a free tier for various services that you can launch into, but you'll need a credit card to sign up. From there, once you launch into the AWS console, if you go to SageMaker, you can get into SageMaker Canvas, and it's all usage based for the billing. So you're billed for the duration that you're using SageMaker Canvas, and you could use it from there. We have some more detailed, maybe some longer videos available on YouTube and the like that can kind of take you through from launching in the console to actually using SageMaker Canvas that could be helpful if you're just getting started.
Okay, so, again, if you're not an AWS customer, and while this looks interesting, there are similar tools. This is a simple overlay. All the people on this webinar already have their own data silos, huge amounts of data. This can be a seamlessly integrator or deployable tool that people can start using almost in a matter of minutes. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah, you certainly, if you can export the data into CSV, or maybe it's in a Snowflake or something like that, you can connect and bring that data into SageMaker Canvas and work on your models there.
Okay.
All right. Now, next, we'll kind of look at some of the use cases that you can do. So some of the things that are common here, the customer churn that I was just looking at, some fraud detection, demand forecasting, many more use cases within SageMaker Canvas for text-based data and image-based data. But there's a ton that you can do. Definitely encourage anybody that has access to give it a shot. It can be really fun to see how you can put things together, and a lot of times it can turn from poking around, working with some data, finding things, into big business impacting projects, just because it becomes so low friction. Ultimately, we're trying to democratize machine learning and make sure that everybody has access to these tools. Now, if you do need maybe a less opinionated service, so you can massage the data, or maybe you have deep domain expertise or some data science training, well, we still want to make your lives easier, and that's where our low-code services come in. And the Wrangler tool from SageMaker is a great way to prepare your data without needing to have maybe a ton of data science experience or a ton of coding experience. Now, the data import is going to look really similar to what we did with SageMaker Canvas, where you point to a data source and it reads it in. Could be still CSV files in S3, that sort of thing, but you're going to read the data in one way or another. You get similar visualizations to what you had. You get a little more control on how the visualizations are created, but simple visualizations. But more powerful is that you get machine learning specific analysis. So whenever you're training models, there are a lot of things about your source data that can destroy any chance of building a productive model. So in this case, it's just one example, but its target leakage would ruin this model if you had trained the data with this. So it's going to pop up a big red flag that says you have leaked what you're trying to predict into the data you're training on. So here we have ARR delay. So perhaps you're trying to predict if a flight was delayed or not. Well, if you have two columns that say that the flight's delayed, maybe in a direct and an indirect way, you need to make sure you exclude that before you train the model. Otherwise, it's not going to predict based on the unknowns. It's going to just use that one column and not going to be good at predicting based on new data. So once you know that you have a problem, obviously you have to fix it. Now, Data Wrangler has over 300 built-in data transformations to do that exact thing. So if you want to drop a column, you don't need to understand how to write it in Python. You just click the transform, select the column you want to drop, and it's going to drop it. All the other types of things that you want to do, you can, again, do with no code to do feature engineering, one-hot encoding for categorical values, that sort of thing. But you also have the ability to use your own transforms. So maybe you are comfortable writing a little bit of Python and it's more efficient for you to just use Python code maybe you got from a sample repository or that you've written. You can also create custom transforms. So this is why this is the low code platform instead of the no code, because you do have the option to use code. But either way, as you create each of these steps, it's going to build a production grade workflow. So you can easily see how each of those steps is being processed against your data, and that you're writing the data out to an S3 destination where you'll ultimately train off of that data. It could also go to our feature store. So you see a box that says drop the leaked target, you see a box to do one-hot encoding, etc. Very easy to follow. You can click in and see the additional steps in each of these. But at the end of the day, once you've prepared your data, you need to actually train a model. Now, one of the ways to train a model with a low code footprint is to use SageMaker Autopilot. So SageMaker Autopilot is going to work on tabular data, and it is going to select an algorithm and start training, or many algorithms, and start training on your data. Now, to do a training job, it's going to look really similar, again, to what we saw before. You're going to browse to or type in the bucket where you output your data from the data wrangler job, but select the data and select the column in that data that you want to predict. Once you do that, SageMaker Autopilot is going to start training a number of different models, and it's going to tell you in plain English, this is the best model. And once you have that best model, if you want to use that, you can go ahead and deploy it. If maybe you are a little more advanced on the machine learning side and you want to use a different metric other than accuracy, area under the curve, fission, whatever, you can select other models and deploy them. But if you don't have that expertise or it's not important for your particular use case, you can just hit deploy model and it'll deploy SageMaker inference endpoint for you to start making predictions against this data. So again, really easy, really tightly formatted as far as how you can get from data to being able to predict data in a very, or predict results in a very short period of time.
Hey, Thaddeus.
Yes.
It's a couple of questions here. First, again, the vast majority of our audience are insurance financial services. A lot of concerns about data compliance, data security. As you're taking data, which could be very confidential information, financial data, social security information, out of one data source into another, how does AWS protect that data? How do you ensure that the data analytics are being done consistent with security policies? And I'm also curious, I know you're based in Charlotte where you got Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Truist. Do you have any examples within this broader defined of insurance financial services, some either customers you may have worked with where they successfully use this? So really two questions about the security and any financial service insurance examples where they've really tremendously improved their operations with these tools.
Yeah, so certainly a lot of customers out there using the tools in the financial services sector. I don't know offhand of the referenceable ones. Obviously, we have Liberty Mutual coming up later, so that being a referenceable for the intelligent document processing. But we do have reference websites where we can easily look up and see some financial services customers. As far as how we protect it, all the data in S3 by default is encrypted now. So this data is in your account. It is in your bucket that you control the encryption settings on. So it's certainly not something that is difficult to build the compliance around, but anytime you're working with sensitive data, obviously bringing in the right people from your organization that understand the compliance and can leverage the tools that we have available within AWS to create a secure posture would be appropriate. So the capabilities are there, I guess, is the piece I want to focus on. And we probably have to have more specific conversations about the specific types of compliance and the customers that are kind of achieving those on AWS.
Okay, so people have this, they can do follow-up with you or the appropriate AWS colleague, you can go through the configuration settings to ensure, let's say, that someone can't just simply take the data, put it on a USB drive, create a CSV or Excel that they want to analyze at home, and then suddenly they could run afoul of data compliance issues or something worse.
Yes, certainly anytime a USB drive is in the mix, it sounds like there may be something questionable happen with moving that data. So make sure any data that you're exporting from the system in your environment is aligned with the correct controls based on the sensitivity and your corporate policies.
I got it. And you can, that can all be set up as people want to do this trial or start using this solution.
Of course.
Okay, good. And then, okay, we can go through some of the examples. Maybe you can send me a link to some of these specific financial or insurance industry customers that are taking advantages. Obviously, in insurance, you've got all the actuarial analysis. I mean, all the data that comes in. I thought when you're alluding to fraud, I mean, that's obviously a key concern to make sure that claims are legitimate. And I'm sure that there are some obvious solutions within insurance when you're looking at all the reams of data that comes in. And, one other final thing, you talked about just using CSV. Can you also use this kind of tool to incorporate other data streams that may not be as simplistic as a CSV? And I think the answer is probably yes, but tapping into things like data lakes to provide an ability to have a funnel of multiple data types to try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, so if you've got a data lake on S3 or Snowflake or data warehouse in Redshift, you can connect directly into those. Lots of different data sources available with SageMaker Data Wrangler to pull that data in. And then once you've got it in, you can train your models against it. So it works very broadly on different sorts of data types. But most of the time when we talk about low code, no code, people are often required to use CSVs and things like that. That's the only reason why I focused on that. But it's a great point. Data lakes, data warehouses, certainly native imports to both of the tools we've talked about.
Okay. All right.
All right, so the last thing in the low code space, it's kind of moving further down the spectrum as far as how low code it is, but it's our SageMaker Jumpstarts. And because generative AI is such a hot topic and we're low on time, I'm just going to focus on that one, but there are hundreds of different kind of pre-built solutions in SageMaker Jumpstart that can help you get started with models that you can do transfer learning against, with sample scripts, with everything that you need in order to add your data in and create a model. So works across different data sources with tabular that we were talking about before, like the CSV types, vision against image and video, text, audio, etc. But if you actually jump into the console and look at the SageMaker Jumpstarts, you can kind of see all the different options that are here for the quick starts. You can search, type in the solution, what you're trying to do, fraud detection, customer churn, whatever it is, you're likely to find SageMaker Jumpstart. But again, lots of different options that you can use here. Fraud detection is something that you can do out of the catalog, and we'll touch on that in just a second, I guess, because we do have the generative AI piece. Now, with generative AI, the foundation models that allow you to create novel content that doesn't exist somewhere else, a lot of times this can be perceived as like a gimmick or a game and not something that's particularly business focused. So I've got a picture of a gentleman and I want to put goggles, VR headset on somebody or make them into a lady with a VR headset. Interesting, certainly, that the AIs can do these things, create a room that doesn't exist, and you get a beautiful kind of designed interior that doesn't exist anywhere the AI just created. But there's also a lot of very business focused generative AI use cases that sometimes don't get as many of the headlines as some of the cool stable diffusion type generative AI stuff. Here is a simple example where generative AI is used to summarize a transcript. So if you have an hour-long customer support call, it's easy to run that through a transcription service and get transcription, but you ultimately don't want to have to read all of that text. So here, the AI is going through the data and it's creating a little one-line summary. A customer wants to get more information about pricing. Very useful, clearly saves time for note taking and kind of going back and understanding what happened on a prior portion of a call. Here is pulling out kind of an abstract, if you will. So if you've got a ton of tech documents, you need to create abstracts for them, AI can do that for you. And then just word tunes, so kind of changing the language, but lots of really practical use cases. But we're still at the very beginning of this generative AI journey, so I'm sure you'll all be able to come up with your own unique ways to leverage the generative AIs. And if you pick one of these models and build it yourself, you can create something novel that your generative AI has unique characteristics based on the data that you've trained it on, while you're still taking advantage of all that base level data that was put into those models. So huge amounts of data is already kind of trained through those models, and then you just need to process it through your data so that you can get those unique use cases, unique sets of data trained into the models. So lots of different use cases. We mentioned fraud detection, and it's not immediately evident how generative AI is useful in fraud detection, but I did want to just as the last thing talk about that. So with generative AI, if you train it based on your known safe transactions, it can then generate a huge set of data that is non-existent transactions, but follow a known good pattern. Then based on that additional data that you have, you can then use that in your fraud detection. There have been some really interesting papers published on using generative AI in fraud detection that had some impressive improvements over using the initial safe transaction sets to predict fraudulent transactions. So sometimes you do have to think a little outside of the box on how you can apply this to your environment, but definitely something we see lots of customers interested in, and something that you can use SageMaker Jumpstart to experiment with or productionize in your own environment. So that's all I have. I appreciate the time and attention.